Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on Lord here. Hopefully, we've got first Moondog.
Political will for reform as a blancmange. They just don't want to go there.
Of course, much of this lack of will can be sheeted home to that insidious electronic graffiti that is corrupting the public conversation of that country, of our country rather. That of course is Twitter, which
It's
got
terrible.
It's an appalling thing. It got a bit of a serve this week.
I'm very busy on the ground. I don't have time to take counsel from the East Coast Twitterati. There's a significant disconnect between what people are saying over East and what's happening here in Canning. People of Canning are concerned about jobs, the problem of ICE and infrastructure. And so I'm focused on the ground game here.
There we go. As we shape up into Canning, the Mr. Hasty, the candidate there. Jane, he doesn't like the Twitter sphere, but and that was a theme taken up in a lot of the conservative commentary over the weekend. How Twitter is bringing us down.
Well, I find it bizarre because the Twitter take-up in Australia is actually really small. It's only a couple of % of Australians actually use Twitter, and if you're going to talk about the way Australians use the internet to talk about politics and social issues,
real conversations like Facebook.
Why don't they ever mention Facebook, which has millions and millions of users in Australia and gets a huge amount of traffic on political discussion? And politicians just seem to forget about it because they're too busy saying, well, he called me words I can't say on radio on Twitter. I just find it weird.
Is there a thing here, David Hunt, of the world is changing and politics is slow to appreciate the way in which it's changing, therefore it simply abuses the changing world?
Well, look, I think it boils down to you don't need 140 characters for a three-word slogan, do you? I mean, it's probably it's a waste.
Get an entire manifesto into 140 characters.
Look, I love Western Australian parochialism. I'm an effete East Coast latte drinking basket weaver, and I've recently subscribed to Twitter. But I think coming to grips with the new media is something that lots of consultants are getting paid lots of big money to go and teach politicians how to do. And it's either anodyne much of the time, or it's ineffective. I mean, there are not many politicians of either stripe that I would actually look at anything they tweet. My eyes tend to just gloss over it because you know what's going to be said before it's said.
I wonder, Mark Triffett, if there's a misunderstanding there, that a lot that's happening in our world of communication and connectivity is going to change the nature of politics. And it's not just a matter of learning how to tweet your slogan. I think we need to adjust to a new thing where people can talk to each other.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the unease that politicians have about Twitter and the social media universe is it's not controllable, and politicians are very much about controlling the message and making sure that everything is in sync and everyone is saying the same thing. So when they're confronted with an environment where everything is going off at a million miles an hour and it's very centrifugal, I think the thing they tend to do is retreat. The disconnect, I don't think, is going from the politicians to as that candidate from Canning was talking about. It's actually the other way. I mean, politicians actually have to learn to have a two-way conversation with people, not just simply a one-way manifesto monologue, which is basically what they're hardwired to do. So at some point they're going to have to learn, but it looks like they're going to have to learn the hard way.
And I think it's too late to say they're going to have to learn that it's going to happen. It's already happened. It actually happened years ago, and they're catching up.
The world has picked up and shifted. Indeed, it has. Look, thanks to all our outsiders this morning. Much to discuss there, and yes, the Canning by-election of which that's going to occupy us, I think, in the fortnight ahead. Dr. Mark Triffett joined you, age columnist, former Director of Strategic Communications at the Business Council of Australia, a lecturer in public policy at the University of Melbourne. David Hunt, whose biography is far too long for this segment.
Okay, well, if it's far too long, we won't listen to it. So once again, at the last minute, within half an hour of going to air, the ABC Radio National Program Director got an attack of the political correctness, and we had no first dog on the moon. Maybe first dog on the moon was going to talk about the same week that the United States military intelligence released reports of how the Royal Australian Air Force, either Hornets or Super Hornets, were bombing the Camels and the second-hand Humvees in the sand dunes in Iraq again. And out of the cloud of debris was seen to be a woman and a child staggering, and somebody showed up on a motorcycle and took the child away, and the woman just lay down on the footpath, pavement, median strip, roadside. Doesn't say whether she died or not. But the Yankees say that there could be some difficulties with releasing this information, because there are going to be some people who won't want their people to know that we're bombing women and children. $15 million a day of Australian taxpayers' money to bomb women and children among the Camels and the second-hand Humvees. Because Tony Abbott wants to be a great military leader. He sees things in black and white dichotomous terms where he has God on his side, and therefore he's allowed to go and kill anybody who says they have God on their side, and that's why they're killing people. It's a little bit like the Euro peons who are shitting their britches because, ISIL is blowing up archaeological sites. How terribly vandalistic of them. How many archaeological sites did the Royal Air Force bomb out of existence just 75 years ago? Is it not true that the people who live in the Levantine have not yet commenced to forgive Europe because Napoleon's artillerymen got drunk and shot the nose off the Sphinx? Now, why is it that blowing up a temple in Palmyra is apparently so much worse than shooting the nose off the Sphinx? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's not as if the civilization in the Middle East, which the archaeologists are attempting to immortalise, if not deify, it's not as if that wasn't the civilization which took the broadacre agro-culture of harvest everything, which the Turks had invented in Göbekli Tepe, and they applied it so devastatingly diligently that, I mean, something like The Economist said to the Pharaoh, mate, we need a tourist attraction. So they cut down all of the forests and they wiped out the grasslands in order to grow the barley and the wheat to feed the stonemasons who built the pyramids. And here we are, 5,000 years down the track, and we've still got tourists visiting Egypt to look at the pyramids. But you can't grow shit in the Sahara Desert that the stonemasons effectively created by producing the demand for the barley and the millet or whatever it was, which fed the stonemasons. I mean, I don't really see why the people who live in the part of the world that's become an uninhabitable, desertifying dust bowl, as greenhouse effect driven global warming caused by anthropogenic carbon released to the atmosphere causes the rains to fail, the crops fail, the agricultural population in the hinterland moves into the cities and becomes a huge, unemployed, festering, massive, discontented crankiness. And then, historically, when the crops fail, the people revolt and they defenestrate the king. So, of course, you've got rebellions and revolts and insurrections, and anybody who's got the inclination and the ability tends to want to go off and capture somebody else's food. And anybody who hasn't got the inclination or the weapon tends to want to run away. So, yes, we have forced migrations coming out of Africa, and they're heading towards Europe. And guess what? It was the Euro peons who went to Africa and destroyed their entire way of life so that the Euro peons could get rich. If that now means there's a flood of starving Africans headed for Europe, well, that's what it means when you read in the books that the sins of the fathers are bestowed onto or visited onto the sons, even unto the seventh generation. How many of the people who have got fat, comfortable, happy bourgeois lives in Europe now are descended from somebody who 7 generations ago was busy colonising Africa or India or Asia or the Pacific? Of course the bloody Europeans are going to have to cop a forced migration wave. And for Tony Abbott to decide that because there's a picture of a dead 3-year-old washing up in the surf, therefore he's right to be stopping the boats. Stopping the boats, that just means that the victims get to stay with the perpetrators. Once they run out of stored food, ISIL will probably start eating their own population. That'll be their next trick. If you don't let people run away from that, they have a worse time. Personally, I don't know what the solution is. I think it's just going to put so much pressure on the European economies that they will go the same way. They will have increasing unemployed. There'll be a whole bunch of people who want to blame some other minority who they can see is slightly less powerful than them. There'll be less trade. There'll be less demand. Commodity prices will fall off. Here in Australia, it means that anybody who's got shares in any kind of mining industry is going to have to sell them pretty quick. Anybody who's got real estate in the city would be well advised to get the hell out before the bubble bursts, because there's no more hot money floating around in China which needs to be laundered through the Sydney and Melbourne stock real estate markets. And of course, they're booming because Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey have got real estate in Sydney, and they didn't want there to be any restrictions on Chinese investors coming and buying holiday houses in Australia and knocking them down and putting up duplexes and selling one half of the duplex. Oh no, that was good because it made money for Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey and their particular little clique of friends. Yeah, so what else is going on? Well, the Accident Investigation Board's interim report into the Hawker Hunter T7, which crashed at Shoreham, has come out. And yeah, I was wrong. My initial impression was that it didn't seem to get much above 3,000 feet at the top of its loop. I was wrong because Heathrow radar says it only got 2,600 feet at the top of its loop. It was only going 100 miles an hour when it was upside down at the top of the loop. So maybe that little 45-degree yaw and an attempt at a roll, maybe that was his attempt at the top of the loop to try and roll upright and perform a half Cubanate or an Immelman recovery from a half loop. But perhaps he was going so slow at the top of the loop that he couldn't get any aileron response out of it. The drop tanks were indeed full, as I suggested, because of the size of the blevies. The pilot requested full tanks. He did an extra long takeoff because he went downhill, and that was, he thought going downhill was going to be better than going uphill into the wind. So he had a long, bumpy takeoff. The aeroplane seemed to be in perfect condition. There were people who said that civilian jets don't have ejector seats. Yeah, well, that's a lot of shit. The two blokes who were on the maintenance crew, they told the Accident Investigation Board that the ejection seat was in perfect condition. They pulled the safety pins and put them in the stowage position. So nobody knows whether he tried to eject or whether the impact of hitting the ground caused the ejection seat to partially initiate its sequence. Suffice to say, the canopy was found hanging in a tree. The pilot was strapped into his seat and the seat was not in the cockpit, which kind of surprised me, because normally if you've got enough of a seat initiation for the canopy to go and the seat to move, then the rest of the sequence goes on. Like the first part of the sequence is a cordite charge to push the seat up the rails, and at the same time a rocket motor ignites. So I don't understand that. Maybe the cockpit just fell to pieces so bloody fast that the seat flew out of it. Didn't look like that in some of the still pictures that I saw though. So the pilot had 40 hours on type in the last 4 years, 10 hours a year every display season, but he had about 500 hours flying other things. The big question is why? Why did he try to do a loop from an illegally low height in an aeroplane that was too heavy and packed full of fuel? And isn't it a pity that it's surrounded by open countryside, he managed to hit a bloody motorway packed with a traffic jam? Could have gone anywhere else and it wouldn't have made much difference. It just would have been him getting hurt. I think he's going to be looking at some manslaughter charges. I hope this fits in the 15-minute upload limit. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.